Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. I'm glad you're here. If you've spent any time on this channel, you know the kinds of stories we tell. Men who came here chasing something love, a fresh start, a retirement in the sun, and found that the dream and the reality didn't quite line up. Some of those stories involve nightclubs and bar girls and decisions made at 2 in the morning that look very different at 2 in the afternoon. Some involve dating apps and wire transfers, and a woman who turned out to be 3 women. Some involve business plans that seemed airtight until they weren't. This one is different. This one is quieter. And in some ways, that's what makes it harder to watch. Brendan is 65 years old. He's from Tipperary, in the Irish Midlands, not the postcard Ireland of Connemara and the wild Atlantic way, but the real inland Ireland, the one that doesn't make it onto tea towels. He spent his working life underground, a coal miner. 40 years of it, give or take, between Ireland and Wales, and a stint in Australia he'd rather not dwell on. He is not a man given to drama or self-pity or wasted words. He is, as you'll hear, exactly the kind of man that a certain kind of person knows how to read. He came to the Philippines not looking for love. He's very clear about that, and I believe him. He came looking for something much simpler, and in some ways much sadder. He just wanted somewhere that didn't feel like a waiting room. What he found instead is a story we haven't quite told before on this channel. No app, no bar. No obvious moment where you could pause the video and say, there, that's where he should have walked away. Just a guest house front desk, a smile, and a connection that felt, to a man carrying the weight he was carrying, like the first real thing in years. He lost a great deal. Not just money, though the money is significant. He lost something harder to put a number on. This one is going to stay with you. Here's his story, in his own words. I started underground in 1979. Arigna, that was the coal mines in County Roscommon. If you're not Irish, you won't know it, and even most Irish people wouldn't. It wasn't a famous place. It was a wet, cold, low-seam operation in the middle of nowhere, and the coal was poor quality, and the pay wasn't much better. I was 17 when I went in the first time, and I remember thinking the darkness had a weight to it that you didn't expect. Not just the absence of light, an actual pressure. You got used to it. You got used to most things underground. Arigna closed in 1990. By then I knew the work, so I followed the work contract mining in the Welsh valleys for the better part of a decade. Then 2 years in Queensland that I didn't enjoy and won't say much more about, except that the money was right and I came home when it was done. Roscrea, County Tipperary. That's where I was from. That's where I went back to. That's where Attracta was. We married in 1986. She was from the town, worked in the credit union, knew everyone within 20 miles by name and probably their mother's maiden name as well. I was the quiet one and she was the talker, and it suited us both down to the ground for 35 years. I won't go on about her. She wouldn't want me to, and that's not what this is about. But you need to understand who I was before the Philippines, and Attracta is most of that answer. She was diagnosed in 2019. Ovarian cancer. They caught it, they thought. And then they didn't catch it. And then there were more consultants and more hospitals and the language of oncology that you learn the way you learn the language of underground mining, slowly, out of necessity, until the words that once frightened you become just words. I became her carer in the last 18 months. Properly, I mean not the supportive husband who drives to appointments. I mean I learned her medications. I knew her face well enough to read the pain before she said a word. I slept in the chair beside the hospital bed because the ward was cold, and I didn't trust anyone else to watch her properly through the night. She died in February 2022. I didn't fall apart. People perhaps expected that I would. We'd been together 35 years. And she was the center of everything. But I didn't fall apart. I just stopped. Sat in the kitchen. Ate toast. watched the television without taking in a single thing it showed me. My daughter Sinead rang every Sunday from Toronto. My son Kiaran came down from Dublin when he could, which wasn't as often as either of us would have liked, though I never said that to him. A neighbor suggested a grief group in the town. I went once. It wasn't for me. I don't do well in rooms where people cry in front of strangers. Down the mines you learned that feelings were private things. You dealt with them in the dark, on your own time. I sold the house in the autumn of 2023. I couldn't justify staying in it. Every room held something that I wasn't ready to be held by, if that makes sense. I walked away with €158,000, which was more money than I had ever seen in one place in my life, and I moved into a rented flat in Nenagh that had magnolia walls and a view of a car park, and felt, from the first day, like somewhere you stayed while you were waiting to. Oh, find out what came next. I didn't know what came next. That was the problem. Ciaran showed me the YouTube video. He didn't mean anything by it. He was just filling a conversation, I think, trying to find something to talk to me about that wasn't how I was managing. It was some fella from Limerick, walking along a beach in Cebu in January in a short-sleeved shirt, talking about how far your pension went, how friendly everyone was, how the sun was splitting the stones while back home it was lashing rain. I watched it 3 times that evening. Then I found more videos. Men retiring early, men my age and older who'd packed in the cold and moved somewhere warm and built a different life on a modest income. I watched 40 or 50 of them over the following weeks. I wasn't looking for a woman. I want to say that plainly because I know what people assume, and the assumption isn't fair. I'd been with Attracta since I was 24 years old. The thought of replacing her, or trying to, wasn't something I had any appetite for. What I was looking for was something much simpler, somewhere to sit outside in the warmth, somewhere that didn't feel like a waiting room, somewhere that wasn't the flat in Nenagh with its magnolia walls and its view of a car park and its absolute silence after the 6 o'clock news. I booked a flight to Cebu in February 2024 for the following month. 4 weeks. See how I found it. I'd worked in Queensland. I wasn't afraid of heat. I had enough money to do it comfortably and no particular reason not to. I told myself it was just a holiday. I believed myself as well. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I genuinely believed it. I landed in Cebu on a Tuesday morning in March 2024, and the heat hit me coming off the plane like opening an oven door. Not the dry Queensland heat I remembered. This was wet, heavy, the kind that soaks into you immediately. The air smelled of diesel and something frying, and what I later learned was the permanent low note of a tropical city going about its business at full volume. Jeepneys everywhere, painted in colors you wouldn't believe, loudspeakers on tricycles, a horn being used somewhere every 3 or 4 seconds. Cebu City Airport is not a large airport, but it felt, to a man who'd just come from a flat in Nenagh with a view of a car park, like someone had turned every dial up to its highest setting. I got a taxi to a guest house I'd booked online in a part of the city called La Hougue, reasonable enough place, clean. The woman at the desk gave me a bottle of cold water when I arrived without me asking, which I thought was a nice touch. I went to my room, lay on the bed under the ceiling fan, and listened to the city outside the window, karaoke starting somewhere nearby even though it was 11:30 in the morning, dogs, a generator, music from a phone being played too loud, and I thought, right. So this is it. I spent the first week cautiously. I'm not a man who dives into things. I walked around the city, found a Jollibee because I'd seen it mentioned in the YouTube videos, had a meal there that I didn't entirely understand but enjoyed well enough, went to the SM City Mall one afternoon just to be in air conditioning. Watched the Filipino families around me, enormous extended groups of them, grandparents and small children and teenagers all together, and felt, not unhappily, like a man observing a different kind of life through glass. I found Moel Boel on a travel forum. Someone had posted about it as the quieter alternative to the tourist crowds. A small coastal town on the southwest of Cebu Island, about 2 hours by bus, good snorkeling, not yet overrun. I took the bus. It cost about 970, roughly 270, and wound down through the mountains, and I watched the landscape change, and thought that whatever else you said about this country, it was a genuinely beautiful place. Moalboal was right. Quieter. A main road with guest houses and small restaurants along it, the sea at the end, fishing boats, a handful of tourists, mostly younger than me. I found a small guest house a few meters back from the water. Nothing fancy, 800 a night, about 13. A ceiling fan, a bathroom that worked, a small balcony facing a garden. I booked 3 nights. I stayed 3 weeks. She was at the front desk when I arrived. Maye. That's what everyone called her. Her full name was something longer, and she never offered it in those first days. 29 years old, though I didn't know that then. She was small, with her hair pulled back, wearing the guest house's blue polo shirt, and she was dealing with a problem on the phone in Cebuano when I came through the door talking quickly, clearly frustrated, and she held up one finger to me in a way that said, "One moment," and I stood and waited. And when she finished the call, she looked up and said she was very sorry, sir, and asked for my name. And when I told her, she said, "Welcome, Sir Brendan, let me get you a key." I told her just Brendan was fine. She said that felt rude, Poe. I said in Ireland calling someone sir was practically an insult. You'd say it to a teacher you didn't like, or a guard giving you a hard time. She laughed. Not a polite laugh. A real one, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine. She said that was very strange, and she'd think about it. She called me Sir Brendan anyway for the first few days, and then she started saying it with a slight smile, and then eventually she dropped it altogether. And I noticed each of those stages, looking back, more than I understood at the time. I want to be careful here about how I describe what developed over the following 2 weeks, because I know how it sounds. A 65-year-old man on his own, a young woman working the front desk. I know what picture that paints, but it wasn't that, or if it was partly that, it was also genuinely something else. We talked because I passed the desk going in and out and she was often there, and she was the kind of person who asked real questions rather than polite ones. Not where was I from and did I like the Philippines, which was what everyone asked. She asked what I'd done for work, and when I told her about the mines, she wanted to know what it was like. Underground? Was it frightening? Was it loud? How did you know where you were? Nobody had asked me about the mines in years. Most people changed the subject out of politeness. She found it genuinely interesting, and I found her finding it interesting, genuinely surprising. And so we kept talking. She told me a little about herself, spread over several conversations, not all at once, not like someone presenting a case. Her family was in Bohol, the island you could see from the coast on a clear day. Father, mother, 5 younger siblings. She was the eldest. She'd come to Cebu 3 years earlier for work because the money was better, even though better didn't mean much when you were sending most of it home. Her father had been diagnosed recently with diabetes complications. One of his feet was giving him trouble. The circulation and the medical bills were a constant pressure. She said this matter-of-factly, not looking for sympathy, just context for why she was tired. She never asked me for anything. I want to say that again because it's the thing I keep coming back to. In all the time I spent at that guest house, talking to her morning and evening, and sometimes sharing a San Miguel on the small terrace after her shift, she never once made a move toward my wallet. I'd read enough about the Philippines before I came. The forums, the warnings, the YouTube videos with titles like this one, to know what that angling looked like. It apparently looked very different from May. I extended my stay from the booked 3 nights to a week, then another week. I liked Moalboal. I liked the sea in the morning before it got busy, and the way the light went in the evenings, and the cheapness and ease of the food. A plate of adobo and rice from the place down the road cost 1.20 less than two. The San Miguel at the terrace bar was 65 a bottle, and I could sit there watching the fishermen bring in their boats and think about very little, which was, I realized, exactly what I'd come here for. In our last week, we exchanged WhatsApp numbers. She said she hoped I would come back. I said I thought I probably would. That was honest. I genuinely thought I would, in the same way you think you'll return to any place you've enjoyed. On the morning I left to catch the bus back to Cebu for my flight home, I stood outside the guest house with my bag and noticed something that I couldn't quite account for. I had not thought about the flat in Nena once in 3 days, not the magnolia walls or the car park or the silence after the news. 3 days of simply not thinking about it. I didn't know what to do with that. She was on shift and we said goodbye quickly and without ceremony, because that's the kind of people we both were. And I got on the bus and watched Moa Bowl disappear behind a curve in the road. That evening, somewhere over the Middle East on the flight home, my phone connected to the plane's Wi-Fi and a WhatsApp message came through. A photo of the sea at Mole Bowl, taken that evening, the sun going down behind the fishing boats. No text. Just the photo. I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied. And that, if I'm being honest with myself, was the moment. Not the front desk, not the San Miguel on the terrace. That photo, and me choosing to answer it. That's where the story I'm telling you actually began. I got back to Nena in the middle of April, and the weather was exactly what April in Tipperary always is. Gray, damp, a cold that wasn't dramatic enough to complain about, but settled into you anyway. I unpacked my bag, hung my things up, stood in the kitchen of the flat and looked at the magnolia walls and the view of the car park and thought, 3 more months of this before summer, if you could call it that. That evening, May sent a message asking if I'd landed safely. I said I had. She said good, she was glad, she hoped I'd sleep well after the journey. That was it. No drama. No declarations. Just the kind of message a decent person sends when they're thinking of you. I slept better than I had in months. I want to explain what those WhatsApp calls became, because I think it's important. I know what people imagine when they hear about a 65-year-old widower talking to a 29-year-old Filipino woman on his phone every evening. I'm not going to pretend the thought didn't cross my own mind in those first weeks that I should be careful, that I was probably being foolish, that this was precisely the kind of situation I'd watched videos warning me about. The thought crossed my mind and I examined it and I set it aside, and I'll tell you why. The calls weren't what those warning videos described. There was no heavy flirtation, no talk of love, no daily performance of missing me that seemed calibrated to produce a particular response. She'd ring around 8 o'clock her time, which was around midday mine, or sometimes I'd ring her. She'd ask about my day. I'd ask about hers. She remembered things I'd mentioned, that I'd said I was thinking of getting a new coat before winter. She'd ask if I'd found one. That I'd mentioned Kiaran's youngest had a football match. She'd ask how it went. Small things. The kinds of things that tell you a person was actually listening. Nobody had been actually listening for a long time. Not really. Sinead listened on Sundays, but there was always the slight formality of obligation about it. The check-in quality. Ciaran listened with the distracted half-attention of a man with young children and a demanding job. I don't blame either of them, but the difference was noticeable, in the way that warmth is noticeable when you've been cold for a long time. About 3 weeks in, she mentioned her father's situation. The ultrasound had confirmed the circulation problem was worse than they'd thought he needed, specialist blood tests and a follow-up consultation in Tagbilaran, and the cost was going to be 100,500, roughly 35. She wasn't asking. She mentioned it the way she always mentioned the family difficulties, as context rather than request, in the same matter-of-fact voice she'd used to explain why she was tired in Mobile. I sent 12,000 that evening via Remitly, about 19. I rounded up because rounding up seemed sensible. There were always extra expenses with medical appointments, transport, waiting. She rang back and said I shouldn't have. She hadn't meant it that way. She'd manage. I said it was nothing. It genuinely was nothing. I had 155,000 euros sitting in an account I barely looked at. Sending 190 to help a sick man get his blood tested felt, if anything, like the minimum a person could do. She thanked me quietly. Didn't carry on about it. Didn't ring back 3 times to express gratitude. Didn't make it into a significant moment. Just said thank you and meant it and moved on. I noted it as evidence. Now, listening back to myself say that I noted it as evidence, I can hear how it sounds, like I was building a case. And I suppose I was, though not consciously. I was constructing, week by week, a picture of a person who was not what the warnings described. Each piece of evidence went into the picture. She doesn't flirt, she doesn't demand, she doesn't make a performance of gratitude. She remembers small things. She's honest about her family's difficulties without using them as leverage. The picture said, "This is different. This is real. You've read about the other kind and you know the difference." I had read about the other kind. I'd spent a fair bit of time on the expat forums by then, the Philippines-focused ones, and I understood broadly how Filipino family structure worked. The eldest daughter as the de facto provider. The expectation that she would carry the family financially until her siblings were established enough to share the load. I'd read about OFW culture, the millions of Filipinos working abroad and sending money home every month, and how a foreign partner fits into that picture as another form of remittance, essentially. A resource not always because of cynicism, but sometimes simply because the expectation is so deeply embedded it's invisible. It's just how things are done. I thought understanding this inoculated me against it. I was wrong about that. You can understand a system perfectly and still walk straight into it, because understanding it in the abstract and feeling each individual step are entirely different things. Each step, taken on its own, was reasonable. That's the part nobody tells you. It's not one large, unreasonable request. It's 50 small, reasonable ones. Over the following weeks, there were 2 more transfers, 6,000, about 95, for a school enrollment requirement for one of the younger siblings, some fee the public school was charging that May couldn't cover out of her transcription income. Then 9,500, roughly 50, for a refill of the father's medications, a particular prescription that had run out before the next payday. Both times she sent photos. The school receipt, the pharmacy receipt. Both times she thanked me without fuss. By the time I booked my return flight to the Philippines in July for a 3-month stay, I had sent a total of roughly 450. I had not thought of it as a total. I had thought of it as 3 separate small kindnesses. What I felt, if I'm honest, was something I hadn't expected to feel again. I felt needed. Not the way I'd felt needed during Atracta's illness that had been a consuming, exhausting, total thing, a need that took everything you had, and a little more besides, and left you hollow when it was over. This was different. Lighter. Like being useful without it costing you yourself. Like being the kind of person who could make a practical difference in someone's difficult situation without being destroyed by it. It was, I realize now, exactly the feeling that a man in my position was most susceptible to. Someone had read me very accurately indeed. I booked a 3-month stay. Tagbilaran, Bohol, her island, closer to her family than Molbol had been. She was no longer at the guest house. She'd left the job a month earlier, she said, because the salary simply wasn't covering the family support. She was doing online transcription work, more flexible, and she could do it from anywhere. It made sense to her to move back closer to her family, and it made sense to me that if I was coming back, Bohol was the place to go. I didn't ask when exactly she'd left the guest house. I didn't ask why she hadn't mentioned it happening, only that it had already happened. Those are questions I ask myself now. At the time, the explanation was complete enough that I accepted it and moved on. She met me at Tagbilaran Airport in July with a paper cup of cold water and a smile, and said, "Welcome back." I said it was good to be back. I meant it. The apartment in Tagbilaran costs 22,000 a month, about 30-50, and I want you to sit with that figure for a moment, because it's part of how the whole thing made sense to me. €350 a month for a clean two-room apartment with a ceiling fan, a small kitchen, a bathroom with reliable water pressure, and a covered balcony where I could sit in the evenings with a cold San Miguel and watch the street below. In Nena, the first paying $850 a month for the Magnolia flat and the car park view. The arithmetic of the Philippines was, at every turn, deeply persuasive. May came most days. She'd arrive mid-morning after working her transcription shifts, and we'd go to the market together, the Tagbilaran public market. Chaotic and loud and smelling of fish and overripe fruit and the particular sweetness of freshly cut sugarcane. And she'd explain things, translate prices, bargain with vendors in Bisaya while I stood beside her feeling useless in the most contented way. We'd cook in the apartment. She made sinigang one afternoon that I still think about, a pork and tamarind soup, sour and dense, something I'd never encountered before, and ate 3 bowls of while she watched me with quiet satisfaction. We took the ferry one weekend to Panglao Island. Another time, north to Oslab. Small trips. Easy days. I was, by my own careful admission, happy. Not a large, noisy happiness. The other kind. The kind that mostly feels like the absence of unhappiness, which, at 65, after what the previous few years had been, was more than enough. In our second week, she asked if I'd like to visit her family. She asked it in a straightforward way, as though it were a normal thing to ask, which it was. I was living on her island, spending time with her. It would have been strange not to meet them eventually. I said yes. We took a jeepney from Tagbilaran, about 40 minutes, then a tricycle down a rough road to the barangay. It was a small cluster of houses, coconut palms, a concrete basketball court that seemed to be the social center of the whole community. Children everywhere. A sari-sari store operating out of someone's front window. May's mother had clearly been cooking since before we arrived. There was a spread on the table that represented more food than that household probably ate in a normal week. Chicken adobo, pancit, rice, some fried fish, sliced mango. The younger siblings were shy with me. At first there were 5 of them, ranging from perhaps 10 to 22, and then progressively less shy as the afternoon went on and they realized I wasn't going to do anything alarming. Her father was in the yard, sitting in a white plastic chair in the shade of a breadfruit tree. He was a thin man, not old, maybe 60, but he had the careful stillness of someone for whom movement was something to be managed and conserved. His right foot was bandaged. He shook my hand with a grip that was still firm and said something in Bisaya that May translated as, "Thank you for being kind to my daughter." I said it was no trouble at all, which felt both true and completely inadequate. The house itself was behind him. Tin roof, concrete walls on 2 sides, hollow blocks unpainted. A single electric fan visible through the open door. The floor in the main room was concrete, swept clean. Through a doorway I could see packed dirt in the back section. 1500 lived modestly my whole life. A working man's house in Roscrea. Nothing fancy. But this was a different category of modest. This was people making do with very little, quietly and without complaint, which is something I recognized and respected. May showed me none of this with any agenda that I could detect. She seemed almost embarrassed by the state of the house on the jeepney home. She apologized for it, said she was sorry it wasn't better, that she was working on it. I told her not to be soft. You don't apologize for your family's circumstances to a man who started work underground at 17. She looked at me for a moment and then nodded, once, as if that had settled something. That evening in the apartment, I told her I wanted to help properly. She went quiet, said she couldn't accept it. that he'd already done enough, that it wasn't right. I said it was a monthly support arrangement, nothing dramatic, just covering the medications and the school fees and making sure the family could eat without her having to account for every peso of her own income. She cried. I've thought about those tears many times since. I still don't know with certainty what they were made of. We settled on 15,000 a month, approximately 230. I'd spent more than that on heating oil and Nena in a cold November. The family, after that, treated me with a warmth that was enormous and genuine and difficult to be skeptical about. Her mother sent me home with containers of food after every visit. Her father began to talk to me more, through May's translation, asking about Ireland, about what mining was like, about whether the sea in Tipperary was cold. Her youngest brother taught me 3 words of Bisaya, and laughed himself sideways when I pronounced them. There's a concept here they call utang na lube, a debt of gratitude, the sense that kindness must be acknowledged and returned. I read about it before I came. I experienced it as something warm and real. What I didn't understand yet was that it could operate in multiple directions at once. September. We'd been back in Tagbilaran after a quick trip to Cebu for a few days, and one evening Mai raised the subject of the house. The roof, she said. Rainy season was 6 weeks away. Her mother's chest was bad. She'd had asthma for years, and the damp from a failing roof made it significantly worse. A repair would cost roughly 180,000, about 2,900. A proper rebuild, a solid structure that would last, that wouldn't require patching again in 2 years, 420,000, around 6,700. I understood immediately and practically. I'd spent my life around structural problems. A failing roof is not a cosmetic issue. That 420,000 for a full rebuild was, by any measure I could apply, a reasonable figure for what she was describing. I agreed. She said she knew a contractor, a cousin of her uncle who was reliable and affordable, and could start within the month. I transferred the money in 2 installments directly to her account. I flew back to Nena in October. I had a tenant in the flat's 2nd bedroom to think about. I'd let it short-term while I was away, and there were things to sort. I left Bohol with the rebuild underway, or so I understood. The photos started arriving within the week, concrete being mixed, foundation work. Then walls beginning to rise, gray hollow blocks going up course by course. I'd scroll through them in the flat in Nena on gray October evenings, watching a house being built 11,000 kilometers away on a phone screen, and feel something settle in me that I can only describe as purpose. I had done something real, something solid. The family would have a proper roof before the rains came. The mother's asthma would ease. That was a fact you could touch. I believed, genuinely and completely, that you couldn't fake concrete. Looking back now, I understand that I never visited the build site. Not once. Never spoke directly to the contractor. Never asked for an independent assessment of the cost or the progress. The photos arrived and I accepted them. I had no particular reason to think they were anything other than what they appeared to be, and I had every reason, or thought, I had every reason to trust the woman sending them. Those are the facts. I can state them clearly now. I couldn't see them clearly then because the view from inside a warm feeling is always poor. I got back to Nena in October, and for the first time in 2 years the flat didn't feel entirely like a waiting room. It felt more like a temporary office. I had things to do, plans to make. I was organized, which is a word I use deliberately because it was such an unfamiliar sensation, the feeling of being a man with a forward direction rather than just a man marking time. The nightly calls with May continued. We'd talk about the house progress, what the finished rooms would look like, whether there'd be space for a small garden. She'd describe what she wanted. A proper kitchen, a covered area in the yard where her father could sit in the shade, and I'd listen and make suggestions, the way you do when you're building something together. It was the most purposeful I'd felt since I used to plan the working week underground. Strange to say that, but true. I spent a fair portion of that winter researching the SRRV, the Special Resident Retirees Visa. If you're not familiar with it, it's a program run by the Philippine Retirement Authority that allows foreign retirees to live in the Philippines indefinitely on a non-tourist basis. For someone my age, it required a 20,000 deposit, roughly 18,500, held in a Philippine bank account in your name. Not spent. Deposited. Theoretically returnable if you ever left and surrendered the visa. I read about it extensively, cross-referenced it on expat forums, found the PRA's official website and read their documentation. This was, I told myself, the legitimate part. The above-board bit. I transferred the $20,000 to the PRA-designated account in December. I noted this for viewers of this video as a distinction. That deposit is recoverable in principle. Getting it back in practice has proven considerably more complicated, but the program itself is real. I want to be fair about that. November brought the dengue. May's youngest brother, 16 years old, was admitted to a hospital in Tagbilaran fever, severe dehydration, 3 nights on an IV drip. She sent me the hospital bill before I'd even asked for it. 928,000, approximately $450. The itemized receipt, photographed clearly with the hospital's header and the attending physician's name visible. I transferred the money the same evening. I noted at the time that she'd sent the documentation unprompted. I took that as evidence of transparency. She wasn't hiding anything. She was showing me everything. I thought this was how an honest person behaved. I understand now what it actually was. Sending the paperwork is easy. Anyone can photograph a hospital receipt, real, fabricated, borrowed from someone else's admission entirely. The paperwork doesn't prove the transaction. It just tells you what it needs you to believe. I'm not saying the boy wasn't sick. I genuinely don't know. But I know that I accepted the documentation as proof without asking a single question that might have tested it. In January, she raised the nursing aid course. She explained it carefully, practically, the way she explained everything not as a request, but as a considered idea. If she had a proper nursing aid qualification, she could care for her father at home more effectively, manage his medications and wound care, potentially reduce the hospital visits, and longer term, the qualification would improve her employment options considerably. The course cost $135,000, roughly $50-60, and ran for 6 weeks at a training center in Tagbilaran. I approved immediately. I'd done a first aid certification in a Welsh mine in 1987, paid for out of my own pocket because the company wouldn't cover it. I respected people who invested in their own competence. I transferred the money. She sent me a photo of the enrollment receipt. I thought nothing more about it. By the time I booked my February flight, this time indefinitely, no return booked. I had spent, in total across all the transfers, the apartment rent, the monthly support, the house rebuild, the medical expenses, and the course, somewhere around 58,000. I had not been tracking it as a total. I had been experiencing it as individual decisions, each of which seemed reasonable in isolation. It is only in retrospect that the shape of it becomes visible, the way a geological formation only makes sense from a distance. May raised the land conversation in January, practically and without romance. We were talking about the February trip, and she said, "We need to think longer term." Renting made no financial sense indefinitely. There was a plot of family land adjacent to the rebuilt house, cleared, available, enough space for a proper home. The sensible thing, she said, was to build there. She explained the land ownership situation carefully and correctly. As a foreign national, I could not own land in the Philippines. That's actual Philippine law, not something she invented. Foreigners can own condominium units within limits, but not land. The plot would need to be registered in her name. But it would be our home, she said. She would show me everything. full transparency. Every document, every receipt, she would never cheat me. She said it plainly, not dramatically. You know that, don't you? I said yes. And here I want to pause and be honest with you. The way I've been trying to be honest throughout. I knew that putting money into land registered in someone else's name was a risk. I had read about it on the forums. It was one of the specific warnings that came up repeatedly. You lose control of that asset entirely. If the relationship ends, the land is hers. If she sells it, you have no legal recourse. I knew this. But I also knew, or believed I knew, that this particular woman was different from the women in those forum stories. I had spent months with her. I knew her family. I'd watched her father sit in the yard and her brother recover from dengue, and her mother cook chicken adobo for a stranger from Tipperary because he'd been kind to her daughter. These weren't abstractions. These were people. And I knew that Attracta was gone, and the flat in Nenna was still a waiting room, even with the plans. And I was 65 years old, and the forums were full of warnings, but they were also full of men who'd found something real. And at some point in life you either trust someone or you don't. And I had spent 3 years being incapable of trusting that anything good was still available to me. And his felt good, and she felt trustworthy, and the land felt like the next reasonable step. I transferred ASO 1 million point nouns in 2 installments in late January. Approximately 18,000, which brought my total committed to roughly 76,000 when you included the SRRV deposit. For land title processing, she said, and initial construction costs, the contractor would be the same man who'd done the house rebuild. Work would begin before I arrived. There were things I should have done that I didn't do. I should have engaged a Filipino property lawyer independently, someone with no connection to May or her family, to verify the title process and the land registration. I should have insisted on meeting the contractor directly. I should have asked to see the title documentation before transferring any money, not after. I should have had someone on the ground, independent of everyone involved, confirm that what I was paying for was real. I did none of those things. I told Sinead in January that I was going back to the Philippines indefinitely. There was a pause on the line from Toronto that lasted long enough to be its own comment. Then she said, "Are you sure, Dad?" I said I was. She said she just wanted me to be careful. I told her not to worry. I booked a one-way flight to Tagbilaran, February 2025. I thought, going home. May met me at Tagbilaran Airport on a Tuesday afternoon in February 2025, and I want to be honest about what I noticed in the first 20 minutes, because I noticed things. The phone was new, a different model, newer and more expensive looking than the one she'd had in October. She said her old one had broken, the screen had cracked, and the repair cost more than a replacement. Reasonable explanation. I accepted it. She seemed distracted in the taxi. Not unfriendly, just elsewhere in some part of herself. She said her father had been having a difficult few weeks. The foot was troubling him again. She'd been worried. Reasonable explanation. I accepted that too. And then there was the third thing, which I only recognized as a pattern when I started looking for one later. She checked her phone several times during the drive. Not casually, the way people do when they're half following a conversation, deliberately tilting the screen away from me slightly, then putting it face down on her knee. I noticed it. I told myself I was being paranoid. We'd been apart for 4 months. She was a young woman with a busy life. People check their phones. The apartment was as I'd left it. Clean, aired out, the ceiling fan doing its slow work against the February heat. She'd put flowers on the small table near the window birds of paradise, orange and purple against the white wool. I thought she was expecting me. She prepared. That means something. The next day we drove out to see the land. The plot was real. I want to say that clearly. It existed a cleared rectangle of red-brown earth about 30 minutes outside Tagbilaran, Stakes at the corners connected by orange twine, a rough track leading in from the road, coconut palms along one edge, a view of low hills beyond. I stood in the middle of it and thought, yes, this is something you could build a life on. Then I asked to see the title documentation. What followed took 45 minutes. The first explanation came from May administrative processing delays. The notary handling the transfer had been ill. The Bureau of Land Registration had a backlog. These things always took longer than expected. Then a man arrived whom I hadn't met before, introduced as a cousin who was assisting with the paperwork, who explained it slightly differently. There was a pending verification of the land boundaries that had to complete first. Then a second man I didn't know explained that the original documentation was with a lawyer in Cebu City and would be available within 2 weeks. All three explanations were internally consistent and mutually incompatible. I have sat through a great many safety briefings in my career where the safety report wasn't available because the findings were inconvenient. I know what being managed feels like. It feels like this: 3 different people giving you 3 slightly different versions of a reasonable explanation, each one confident, none of them producing the document. I said nothing. I got back in the car. I decided to wait and observe. 2 days later, the Wi-Fi router in the apartment stopped working. May had mentioned the previous tenant had damaged it, and she'd meant to sort it before I arrived. She hadn't yet. She'd get a new one sorted in the next few days. In the meantime, the neighbor next door, a Filipino family, a couple with a teenage son who'd been friendly since my July visit, said I was welcome to use theirs. I went over one afternoon while May was at the barangay visiting her father. The boy, maybe 16, was curious about the foreign man next door in the way teenagers are curious about things that don't quite fit. We made conversation while I checked my bank app. I mentioned May's name in passing, in context, and his face did something. It was a small thing, a slight shift, the eyes going momentarily uncertain before he composed himself. If I hadn't spent 40 years watching men's faces in confined spaces where they couldn't easily lie, I might have missed it. I asked him directly. He shook his head. I said, "You've seen something, and I'd rather know." He said he didn't want to cause trouble. I said it was already caused one way or another, and I'd rather have the information than not, he told me. The month before I arrived, he'd seen May twice with another foreigner, an older man. They'd been walking on the road near the resort up toward the hill, walking close, the way people walk when they know each other well. He'd thought nothing of it at the time, assumed it was a relative or a friend. Then he saw them together a second time and thought perhaps not. I thanked him. I went back to the apartment. I sat for a while. The next morning I told May I was going for a walk. I drove to the resort. It wasn't a large place, a collection of cottages on a hillside, a small pool, the kind of modest setup that attracts retirees and long-stay visitors rather than package tourists. I parked and walked to the pool area, and there was one foreigner there, sitting in the shade with a bottle of water and a paperback book. Older man, heavy-set, pale in the way of someone who burns easily. American, I would have guessed, before he opened his mouth. His name was Dennis, 68 years old, retired schoolteacher from a town outside Columbus, Ohio. He'd been in the Philippines for 3 weeks. He looked up when I walked over, and I introduced myself by name, and I watched his face do exactly what the boy's face had done, and I knew before he said a single word. We sat by that pool for 2 hours. I'll spare you the full detail of it. 2 old men, one Irish, one American, going through their accounts like bookkeepers auditing the same set of books. Dennis had been sending May $18,000 a month, about $330 for 11 months, beginning the previous March. He paid for her nursing course. He produced the receipt on his phone, identical to the one she'd sent me. He'd been supporting the family through various smaller requests, each one documented. He had photographs of the rebuilt house that he'd been told she was building for her family with his help. The photographs were the same photographs she'd sent me. He believed he was her boyfriend. He had been planning to move to Bohol. He'd been told there was a plot of land, a plan, a future. I pulled up my own phone. We compared, quietly and without drama, what each of us had been told and when. The overlap was almost complete. She had been maintaining two parallel versions of the same story for the better part of a year, each of us believing we were the only one. The construction money I'd transferred had passed through her account and out again within 3 or 4 days of receipt. The bank records I could see on my app showed the outbound transfers clearly, though to where was not visible to me. The Fashion 11,111 for the land title and construction. Gone. The contractor had never been engaged, as far as Dennis or I could determine. The land itself, the real, staked plot of red-brown earth, was genuine family land, as far as we knew, but the title transfer had never been initiated. The money had simply passed through. The nursing course appeared to have been real. She had enrolled, completed it, received the qualification. It had simply been paid for twice, by two different men who each believed they were the only one. I drove back to the apartment. May's phone rang out. Then again, then a third time. I sat at the small table where she'd put the birds of paradise and looked at them for a while. At 6:30 in the evening, a WhatsApp message arrived. Short. She was sorry. Her family needed her. She hoped I could understand. She would pray for me. I read it twice. Put the phone face down on the table. Sat very still, the way you learn to sit still, underground, when something has gone wrong, and there's no point in panic and no use in noise, and the only thing to do is wait for your eyes to adjust to the dark. Then I picked up the phone and called the Irish Embassy in Manila. I am still in Tagbilaran. People ask me why I haven't gone home, and I give them the practical answers, which are true as far as they go. The flat in Nena has a tenant and requires notice. The lawyer here needs me accessible for the NBI complaint process. The SRRV deposit recovery is a slow, bureaucratic business that goes better with a person present than absent. All of that is accurate. But if I'm being straight with you, the way I've tried to be straight throughout this account, there's another reason, too. I am not ready to walk into a room and look my daughter in the face. I am not ready for the careful love of people who are frightened for me and don't know what to say. I'll get there. I'm not there yet. The lawyer is a Cebuano solicitor, recommended by the Irish Embassy Consular Office in Manila. She handles expat fraud cases regularly, she told me at our first meeting, in the brisk, matter-of-fact tone of someone describing a common weather pattern. That she handles them regularly is, itself, something to sit with. She filed a complaint with the National Bureau of Investigation. May has not responded to any legal contact. Her family appear to have moved from the barangay. The rebuilt house, or whatever that house actually is apparently occupied, but by whom and under what circumstances I have not been able to establish. The land itself remains in administrative limbo, while the fraudulent title documentation is investigated. Let me give you the numbers. I think that's the right thing to do. I've been talking around them for the length of this story, and I want to put them in a row so you can see the shape of the thing plainly. The apartment rent from July to October 2022,000, roughly 2,600. The monthly family support from July 2024 through to when the thing ended, 8 months at 15,000, roughly 180.40. The medical costs, the initial ultrasound and blood tests, the medication refills, the various smaller requests total approximately 530. The house rebuild, transferred in 2 installments, 6,800. The dengue hospitalization, 450. The nursing aid course, 50-60. The land title transfer and initial construction, my 10,000. The SRRV deposit to the Philippine Retirement Authority, minus 17,500. Technically recoverable, practically frozen in a process my lawyer estimates will take 6 months minimum. Miscellaneous costs, transport, meals, Small gifts, the things you spend money on when you're living a life and not keeping receipts, approximately T200. The hard losses, the money that is simply gone, approximately 50,480. The SRRV deposit in recovery, T1,500. Effective total, somewhere around 69,000. I have roughly 89,000 remaining of the house sale money. My state pension, 5,253 a week, continues to arrive, and in the Philippines it goes considerably further than it would in Tipperary. I am not destitute. I am not broken. I am, however, not what I planned to be at 65. I had planned, in the vague way of a man who has only recently started planning again, to be building something. I am instead engaged in the painstaking and largely futile work of trying to recover pieces of what I lost. Dennis flew home to Ohio 3 weeks after we sat by that pool. We're still in contact, WhatsApp, the occasional long message back and forth. He is angrier than I am, which I understand. He lost less money in absolute terms, but he had constructed more around it. He was going to teach conversational English at a local school part-time. He had a whole second chapter written. One told him once that I'd never had. A second chapter 1500 just wanted somewhere warm to wait out whatever time was left, and he went quiet for a moment, and then said he thought that probably made me harder to console and easier to survive. And I thought that was well put. I made the calls to Sinead and Ciaran. I'll keep this part brief because it belongs to them more than to me. Sinead went very quiet in a way that was worse than anything she could have said. Ciaran kept his voice careful and level in the way of a man exercising enormous restraint to avoid saying, "I told you to be careful." I don't blame either of them. I wouldn't have known what to say either if the situations were reversed. The calls ended in the kind of suspended tenderness that happens when people love each other and are frightened for each other. And nobody has found the right sentence yet. They'll come and visit. We'll work through it. That's what families do. Now I want to tell you what I think about May, because I've had months to work through it, and I think it matters. I don't believe she is simply evil. I thought about it carefully, the way I think about most things, slowly, in the dark, turning it over until the edges are worn smooth. She was the eldest daughter of a family living in genuine poverty, with a sick father and 5 younger siblings, and no realistic path out of it through her own wages. She found, in foreign men of a certain age and a certain loneliness, a solution that worked. I don't think she invented the warmth entirely. I think the line between genuine feeling and strategic performance blurs, after a while, when survival is at stake. I am Irish and Catholic adjacent, and I know that people can be genuinely sorry about things they planned carefully from the beginning. Both things can be true at once. But there is one thing I cannot fold into that understanding, no matter how many times I try. She knew about Attracta. I told her, early on, about the chair by the hospital bed, about learning to read the pain in Attracta's face before she said a word, about the particular silence of a house where someone is dying slowly. May held my hand when I told her that we were sitting on the balcony in Tagbilaran, the street noise below us, a gecko on the wall, and she said, "Attracta sounded like a wonderful woman." She said it with what I took for genuine feeling. And then she used it. She used the specific knowledge of what I'd lost and what shape the loss had left in me. She found the exact crack, and she worked with it, patiently and accurately, for the better part of a year. That is the thing I'll be some time getting past. Not the money. The money I can account for, line by line, the way you account for any loss. The other thing doesn't have a line. So, if you're watching this, and I'm going to assume you're watching this because you're thinking about coming here, or you're already here, or you know someone who is, I want to leave you with what I actually learned, not what sounds wise. The Philippines is not a dangerous country. I want to say that plainly. Most people I encounter here daily are decent and hardworking and kind in ways that cost them something real. The warmth is genuine. the poverty is also genuine. Both things are true, and both things matter. What I'm telling you is this: never transfer money to land or construction. You cannot independently verify through your own lawyer, not through your partner, not through her family, through someone who answers to you alone and has no stake in the outcome. The legal reality here is clear. You cannot own land, which means any land deal requires extraordinary care. If you won't engage an independent solicitor before transferring the money, don't transfer the money. If you're pursuing the SRRV, do the same. Get independent legal advice, not from the Retirement Authority's own process and not from assurances given by someone who stands to benefit from your commitment to staying. And the third thing, which is the hardest to say and the most important: grief is not a travel problem. It doesn't resolve itself because you've moved somewhere warm, and the people smile at you, and the food costs almost nothing. And for the first time in 2 years, someone seems genuinely interested in what you have to say. That feeling is real. The relief of it is real. But what's underneath it? The stopped clock, the empty rooms, the 2 years of toast and car parks and not knowing what comes next that doesn't move when you do. It comes with you. And the Philippines, with its warmth and its poverty and its extraordinary ability to make a lonely Western man feel seen and needed and useful, is a very poor place to discover that. I should have gone back to that grief group in Nena. I went once, decided it wasn't for me, and looked for a warmer solution. I should have gone back. I should have done something boring and painful and local before I tried to solve myself somewhere beautiful and far away. I'm 65 years old. I have enough to live on. I will be all right, I think. I say that the way a miner says most things without drama, without the expectation that anyone should feel worse for hearing it. You sit in the dark long enough, you learn that it eventually becomes manageable, not better. Manageable. That's enough. That's where we'll leave Brendan for now, sitting in Tagbilaran with his lawyer and his pension and his particular kind of quiet. I want to say something to you directly, on behalf of Inside the Philippines, before we close. What you just heard is not the story of a foolish man. Brendan is careful, self-aware, and deeply familiar with the warnings. He read the forums. He watched the videos. Videos like this one. He knew the shape of what a scam was supposed to look like. What he encountered didn't look like that shape, not from the inside, not while it was happening. That's the thing this story illustrates that most cautionary tales don't. May's situation was not invented. The sick father, the failing house, the 5 younger siblings, the subsistence wages, that was real poverty, real pressure, real desperation. What she did with Brendan and with Dennis was wrong. Why she may have felt she had no other path forward is something we're not going to pretend to resolve neatly in an outro card. The world is more complicated than that, and you deserve to be told so. 3 things to carry away. First, never transfer money to land or construction. You cannot independently verify and legally control through your own solicitor. Second, if you're pursuing the SRRV, get independent legal counsel before you commit a single cent. Third, if you're grieving, or lonely, or running from something, deal with that before you come here. The Philippines will still be here. It's not going anywhere. And it deserves to be experienced by someone who arrived with their eyes open, rather than someone using it as a hiding place from their own pain. We'll have links in the description to resources on SRRV applications and independent legal referrals for expats in the Philippines. Thank you to Brendan for his honesty and his willingness to sit with a very difficult story so that someone else might avoid it. He is still in Tagbilaran. He has, in his own words, enough to live on. We wish him well. Thanks for watching Inside the Philippines. Take care of yourselves out there.